Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Walking on the Cloud with Marco. Today, I'm going to talk about adoption of cloud services, how to go through your cloud adoption process, and what you need to address and what your expectations should be when you're adopting cloud solutions. All right, let's hit the road. So many companies that are adopting cloud are going through a specific process that moves them through not just adopting a new technology, but a lot of times adopting the way a new way of thinking about services, a new way of thinking about solutions, right? When I do cloud trainings, there's a lot of emphasis on stop thinking about servers and start thinking about services, right? Meaning that, which means like when you design your solution, stop thinking what kind of server you're going to use and start thinking about which service you should be looking at for your environment, right? Now, of course, it's completely clear that when you're in an enterprise environment and you are looking at, you have servers that host your application, you have servers that host your databases, you've got servers that host your messaging, you've got servers that host your development, and servers that host your production and test and QA and whatever kind of environment. It is clear that it's going to be the easiest approach to getting your services into the cloud will be just mirroring what you have, right? You have a working environment, it exists in your system, and probably this version that you have of your application can relatively simply be copy pasted over to the cloud, right? That's what we call a lift and shift approach, right? A lift and shift means you pick up your application and you move it to the cloud. Now, one thing about the lift and shift approach that's good is you've got the familiar technologies that you already use, like, for example, you're using virtual machines in your environment, you're going to be using virtual machines in the cloud. You use virtual machines with an application on it, you use the same application on a virtual machine in the cloud. You use a physical database cluster, you move that to virtual machines in the cloud, right? So it's not like you're making a huge change in what you have and what you have to manage. This is really good when your timelines are very, very short. So for example, what you could have is, let's say your company leases data center space at some point in time, right? And now there's 6 months to renewal for that data center space. You got 10 racks and you need to figure out whether those 10 racks, which probably cost you like, $10,000 a month just to have a rack, are you gonna upgrade your hardware in those 10 racks? Or are you gonna sign another lease for 3 years, which is a typical term that you will sign with a certain data center? Are you gonna do that, or are you gonna actually decide whether to maybe migrate, maybe take away those capital expenses for the actual purchase of the new equipment, the expenses that are tied to just an empty rack, right? You're paying for an empty rack. That's not really a service, and it's thousands of dollars a month when you buy big, right? So essentially what we're looking at here is a decision needs to be made quickly. You have 6 months until the lease expires, and you have 100 apps that you are moving off of those 10 racks. What do? Well, you do the simplest solution, you do a lift and shift. Typically, when I see companies doing lift and shifts, they basically approach it from, okay, we had a graphical user interface to manage our virtual machines. We're going to use the graphical user interface to manage the virtual machines in the cloud. AWS console is great. GCP console is great. The Azure console is great, right? They're really nice tools when you're learning about how the system works. when you want to test out new features, when you want to make sure verified solutions do proof of concepts. Now, when you move to the cloud, one thing that you have to think about is automation. What I usually say to my students is use the console, use the graphical user interface until you've learned about how the system works, until you've switched your mindset from your old virtualized infrastructure to cloud automated API addressable infrastructure. Once you're there, you need to start writing automation documents, right? And I tell my students, if you're using the console, you're not really using the cloud service yet. You're learning about the cloud service. Once you've got your first automation document spun up and pushed into the cloud, then you're there, right? This is why we see such adoption of cloud services from the developer side, not as much from the infrastructure side, right? Because developers like to script things. They like to write things in a way that is familiar to them. I talked to a company that does everything in Python. They don't deploy one service through any standardized deployment tool. They don't use any templates, any third parties. They just write their own Python script for everything. Now, their reason behind this is we want to be agnostic as far as the cloud is concerned. We know Python, we're a Python shop. We've picked up the routines and whatever methods and everything that you need to deploy something in one cloud and another cloud and another cloud, and we're just writing everything in Python. That is a really good idea, but you have to have a very proficient, set of developers that will just make sure that those infrastructure documents work, right? You want to deploy some virtual machines, you want to deploy some message queues, you want to deploy some databases, you can just feed Python calls, Java, .NET, whatever is supported by the cloud vendors SDK. And I'm trying to be as neutral when I say cloud as possible, because all vendors essentially allow you to address their infrastructure and their services through the API. So you've done the lift and shift, now you're looking at automation. Yeah, you got a very proficient team of Java, Python, .NET developers, or maybe somebody that writes really good JavaScript or something like that. As long as there's an SDK, you can feed commands to AWS. Now, if you don't have that team, what are you going to do? How are you going to build templates? Now, one really cool thing that vendors provide is usually a set of templates that can be used as a gold standard, right? So you go to the vendor's website and you look for templates for applications, right? For example, and I'm just going to focus here on one cloud right now just to give you an example. With AWS, you've got the quick starts. Quick starts are sort of gold templates that you can use for your designs, for your environments, and you've got everything from your basic web application to 3-tier apps to PCI compliant environments to environments that comply with other standards that are out there. So this is production ready, production grade templates plus other scripting, like for example, there's scripting that updates your operating system, that installs the web server and starts it and makes it auto start, that picks up the DNS name from the metadata service and pushes it into the machine so the machine has the same DNS name from the outside as it has from the inside, right? So it's easier to update. So it's easier to understand which machine you're working on if you log into that machine. There's serverless templates out there, right? The cloud providers will actually give you serverless templates for your serverless applications if you're going to go to the next stage. And the next stage, once you've done the lift and shift, you need to optimize your application. Whenever we look at any kind of cloud journey, it starts with an idea, then sort of typically it'll be a proof of concept which will then go into a lift and shift of pretty much the entire infrastructure. Now, some companies will skip this step because they've got good strategic planning and they will go straight to optimizing, re-architecting the applications, right? Once you're familiar with the cloud services, and once you can sort of compare pricing across, should I run my database on a virtual machine, or should I run a database service that's based on database instance costs, or should I run a database that's based on a per call cost, right? Once you start to compare those services to each other and the pricing, it's a service. It's not a server anymore once you're in the cloud, right? These are services, you deploy them through an API. It's much more complicated to deploy a template that installs your database server and updates it and configures it than it is to send one API call that will bring a database as a service online within, seconds after you've issued the API call, potentially. So once you start comparing these services, it's time to re-architect. And re-architecting usually also means that you will actually be aiming towards more efficiency, more cost savings. So typically what we see is a spike in cost, and then through re-architecting, it slowly levels off, and then you see that final stage where you've, for example, saved 50+%, and then you're trying to optimize and add 1 more, 2 more, 5% more saving every month. When you see these case studies where they say, yeah, we went to cloud and we saved 70% on our cost, first thing you have to know is they're including all the costs. They're including the costs for, empty racks, or they're including the cost for actual floor space, for renting a certain floor space because they had their own data centers. They're including the cost of everybody who was included in data center maintenance. They're including the cost of replacing disk drives and, just buying the hardware and everything. That's the first thing. You got to have a very comprehensive cost analysis of your current situation when you're adopting the cloud. And then the second thing is, not only do you need to understand your current costs, but you also need to understand the cost of the cloud. It might actually be more expensive to replicate your infrastructure in the cloud if you do a lift and shift. That's one caveat that not all businesses understand, that in the beginning, when we lift and shift our application, it's going to be more expensive to run in the cloud. The analysis that's done where they say we've got 70% saving costs, that's after 2 years of running in the cloud usually, right? A typical life cycle of costs is between 1 and 2 years where you get that optimization. Now, why does it take so long to get that optimization in? Well, it has a lot to do with, you need to understand your vendor. There are different vendors. They have different, tips and tricks that you can use to optimize your infrastructure, to make it run efficiently and to make it run cost effectively. And that's the biggest thing, is it's not the technology jump. It's not that you have to reprogram everything down to be completely serverless. Not at all. It's all about learning the functionality, learning the features, getting a better understanding of how to make use of the cloud to actually do the savings. Now, you can get a lot of help with first training, right? Train your teams, educate, whoever is going to be involved with architecting, whoever is going to be involved with developing applications, those people should definitely be educated first. And then you look at the admins, the systems operations team, and you educate them on how to run it efficiently and how to feed back information from running applications to the development team, to the architecting team, so that you have some kind of, feedback loop that helps you optimize your application. And then finally, it's time to actually adopt the cloud and time to try it out. And in the first year, people are going to get things wrong, right? In the second year, you're going to be optimizing all of those things that went wrong. Yes, it's great if you have the ability to be, DevOps from the start, and your CI/CD process will include the cloud migration. That's perfect. You can, cut that down to cut down the learning times to weeks, possibly, right? Days, possibly, right? Because you can quickly do iterations, quickly do tests, let people experiment. And essentially, if you have that ability, that's great. But 90% of the businesses out there, even though they're saying we're adopting DevOps or we're already using DevOps, it's a dev team, it's an ops team, and those two teams are sort of kind of cooperating and kind of talking when they deploy an application. It's not really 24/7 sitting together at a desk and discussing benefits. It's just like, the dev team has somebody from the systems operations team who they can consult with. Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe the systems operation team can talk to somebody from the developers team who developed that application. But it's not true DevOps. And a lot of the times that's a barrier to adopting the cloud. That's why cloud and DevOps fit together so well, right? It's a new technology, it's a new way of thinking, it's a new paradigm in the way we create and consume services in the cloud. And because it's all about automation, because it's all about, if you're using the console, you're doing it wrong, then DevOps makes a ton of sense here. The templates that you write for your deployments, they're all specification documents, nothing else, right? And with those specification documents, you're basically adding the ability to feed those specification documents into the CI/CD process, and the CI/CD process can now deploy infrastructure. You can test it out. You can test it out at production scale, which is another benefit of the cloud that you will never ever have on premises. You can actually deploy your application in a test, and it can be at the same scale as your production, right? That's a really, really big benefit. You can do performance testing on a production scale application, which on-premises application environment allows you to use 100% of the capacity that you need for your production application to do testing. Well, there's none, right? With testing, you usually get like 10 or maybe 20% of the capacity, and then you project how that's gonna work with 100% eventually. So that's a big benefit of the cloud. And all I'm trying to say here is there are ways to do cloud adoption that are going to speed up the process, but cloud adoption is still a process. It still has a learning curve. It will still take time. It will still take a lot of learning about those features, a lot of shifting of paradigms, and starting to think about services, not servers. Those are your key points here. And yeah, unfortunately, a typical enterprise will take, multiple months, maybe a year, even 2 years to get to a point where everything is integrated in the cloud. Everything is running automated in an automated fashion. Everything is actually, easy to deploy. All the, not necessarily DevOps, but all the infrastructure is automated and is able to be provisioned really, really efficiently. All right, that's where I'm gonna end this one today. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in my next one in a couple of days. Bye.